this is a real whirlwind tour of the developments. And we'll look at policy, law, and practice. There is a lot more detail and a lot more developments in the annual report, but I tried to pull out the ones that were kind of the headlines for the year. And we'll just cover the headlines, and hopefully then if you have any questions, we can cover them in more detail. So starting with legal migration, the Employment Permits Bill was the real kind of major development here. It was progressed to committee stage, and various issues were raised at committee stage. And the Employment Permits Bill is quite a wide-ranging bill that consolidates the employment permits legislation in Ireland, modernises it, introduces seasonal worker permits, also moves quite a lot of detail into regulation to increase the flexibility of it, and provides kind of remuneration thresholds and some other requirements. So quite a lot was raised at committee stage that then were kind of to be resolved at report stage that we can discuss if anyone is interested in some of those issues. Another major development in 2022 was in October 2022, the review, the second review of the atypical working scheme was published, really focusing on the Fishers strand. And the key recommendation of that was that the Fishers strand, which has been relatively controversial and there's been a lot of discussion and debate around, is moved to the standard employment permits system administered by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment instead of the AWS, which is administered by the Department of Justice. So the atypical working scheme, the Fisher Strand, stopped taking applications in December 2022, and everyone who was on the scheme was granted stamp 4, unlimited access to the labour market on an exceptional basis. The next kind of development was an agreement in principle for a single application procedure for employment permits and immigration permissions, which are currently 2 parallel processes administered by different departments. And another major one, which I alluded to earlier, was changes to the occupations lists in light of labour shortages. The occupations lists are lists that are used to manage who can qualify for employment permits in Ireland. And what we saw is quite a few healthcare sector professions going onto the critical skills employment list, and then quite a lot of changes in quotas for different low and medium skilled professions on the the list of ineligible occupations. And this was again a response to kind of widespread labour market shortages across Ireland. Moving on to international protection then, as I think most of us are aware, huge pressure on reception systems, and a really significant emergency response in response to that. So with kind of tented accommodation, a lot of different things to scale up, as well as the transit hub set up at City West. We also had, as a result of these large inflows, changes to the vulnerability assessment, where previously it was kind of administered directly. It's now questionnaires are available in accommodation centres that can be returned to the resident welfare team in IPAS, either by the individual or by kind of an NGO or a third party who's working with them. The white paper, of course, was widely discussed in 2022, and we saw that there was a review of the timelines and deliverables of the white paper because of challenges with the number of applications that were received in 2022. The white paper was based on 2,000 places in phase 1 accommodation and 3,500 applications a year roughly. So it was it was quite a significant challenge once there was 13,000 applications. So there was a review that was originally due in the second quarter of 2023. I think we're still waiting for that to be published, but hopefully it'll be published soon. Certain elements, though, were progressed in the meantime, and such as the acquisition of 37 properties in 2022 for vulnerable applicants, the advancement of buying and construction of phase 1 properties, and the agreement of funding for integration workers in all local authorities to put in place these local authority integration teams. Other major developments were the November 8th changes in the International Protection Office to the process for applying for international protection. So one of the changes was that people had to fill in the questionnaire on the day of the application in English with the support of cultural mediators, where previously they had 15 working days to fill it in, and they could fill it in their own languages. And accelerated procedures were also brought in for safe countries of origin, both initial and appeal. And NGOs raised some concerns and criticisms around some of those changes as well. Another major development, of course, was the international protection strand of the regularization scheme, which was essentially to provide status to anyone who'd been in the process for 2 years or more, and basically to kind of clear the backlog of legacy cases in the system. So moving on then, of course, temporary protection was one of the really huge developments in 2022. So, we saw the activation of the Temporary Protection Directive in March 2022 and the lifting of visa requirements for Ukrainian nationals with effect from the 25th of February 2022. We then, on kind of a governance, the governance side, we saw this whole of government response with the cabinet committee set up on the national level with a lot of different departments represented on that committee. But then we also had on the local level, the repurposing of community response forums, which had been set up to respond to COVID-19, and they were basically repurposed to respond to the Ukrainian displacement. We saw the setup of this one-stop shop system for arrivals at points of arrival. So originally in Dublin Airport and then in the City West Transit Hub, where registration happened, PBS numbers, kind of healthcare and linking in with different services, all in one place. Accommodation then, of course, was a really major challenge for the Department of Children in this. And we saw a lot of different accommodation measures being taken, a lot of different strands. So we saw the register of pledges for private accommodation. We saw, the Offer a Home program, the accommodation recognition payment, which basically was a recognition payment for people who were hosting Ukrainians, refurbishment of properties, the rapid build homes, the modular housing project. And in October, we saw some changes to the policy. Where Ukrainians in serviced accommodation were asked to provide a financial contribution, and a change to the refusal policy where only one offer of accommodation would be made. So if someone refused that offer of accommodation, they were offered no more accommodation. But then we saw this really range of supports put in across the board. So we saw social welfare. There were special arrangements to process applications for PPS numbers and income support. So it was a fast track application process put in. In healthcare, there was simplified application forms made for beneficiaries of temporary protection, but also automatic eligibility for the first year. After that, means tested. And we also saw kind of healthcare provision at points of entry. In education, we also saw, quite a wide range of measures put in place for both primary, secondary and further education. So we had the regional education and language teams put in place to support schools to support people in finding places in schools, but also to support schools in putting in place kind of language support measures and things like that. We saw a help desk set up to help people who were looking to go into further education, which kind of provided a single application point for Ukrainians who are looking to go into further education, plus tuition fee support for a variety of further education programs. Unemployment then, of course, they were provided with direct access to the employment market, and there was measures put in place for the recognition of qualifications as well, with a guide published on kind of different Ukrainian qualifications and their equivalents in Ireland, as well as kind of work done by the Department of Further Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science to work with the regulated professions as well in trying to recognise qualifications. There was also a really significant civil society response and several funding schemes put in place. And the Ukraine Civil Society Forum was a very interesting kind of coordinating body for that response, with about 90 organizations, participating organizations in that forum. And again, there's more details of all of those in the report. There was a huge amount of material on temporary protection, so I really do recommend having a look at that. Having looked then at citizenship, we saw two kind of proposed changes that had been advanced in 2022 and have since been adopted. And one of those is the reduction of the residence requirement for people who were born in the state to become citizens. So for other people, it's 5 years, and it's been reduced now to 3 years for people who were born in the state, for minors who were born in the state. And there was also a clarification passed on continuous residence, which is a period that's required in the year before you apply for citizenship. And there was some confusion about what exactly that meant. And it's now been clarified that you can be out of the state for 70 days, plus 30 days in exceptional circumstances that are outlined in the Act. And it was passed in 2023. The beginning of the year also the implementation of the scorecard approach, which again provided clarity on the evidence, the documents that are required for those applying for citizenship. Integration then again there was some significant developments here. So the development of the National Action Plan Against Racism 2022 saw the Anti-Racism Committee submitting its report to the Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and the Youth. And the plan was subsequently published in 2023. But of course, one of the major developments was the hate crime and hate speech draft legislation, which passed second stage of the Dáil in November 2022. So what we saw was new incitement to violence or hatred offences to replace the previous ones from the old Act, as well as the introduction of offences that are aggravated by hatred. So this is, for example, assault aggravated by hatred, which carries higher sentences. It also created a new offence, which is condoning, denying, or grossly trivialising genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes against persons on account of their protected characteristics, which carries a sentence of up to 12 months or a Class A fine. This draft of the legislation had strengthened freedom of speech protections in response to some criticism and discussions around that. It also added a demonstration test to the motivation test, where basically you can demonstrate with your actions before, during, or after the crime hatred, instead of having to prove motivation. So you can demonstrate it with your actions. It basically is kind of an easier test to pass, and it was recommended by the Justice Committee, I believe. And it also added descent and sex characteristics to the protected characteristics. There was, again, significant criticism and discussions of this that we can go into. There's details of them in the report. We can go into them if anyone would like to know more. In trafficking then, there was also significant progress with the revised national referral mechanism. So this was the general scheme on criminal justice, sexual offences and human trafficking that was published in July 2022, and the bill has since been published, and included in that is the revised national referral mechanism. And the goal of that is basically to expand kind of who can identify and refer victims of trafficking beyond the Garda Síochána to other bodies like TUSLA and trusted partners, which NGOs can be named. And it was largely welcomed by stakeholders, although some concerns were also raised. 2022 also saw the development and consultation on the new National Action Plan on Human Trafficking, the publication of the third Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Strategy, which included victims of trafficking as kind of one of the groups that it identified as potentially needing additional supports, and also saw quite a few monitoring reports being published. The US State Department published its Trafficking in Persons report, as it does every year, and Ireland remained on the Tier 2 watch list, which is an increase from what had been there before, so it's an improvement where we are now on Tier 2. We were on the Tier 2 watch list. Tier 1 is the highest. And then Greta, which is part of the European monitoring body, also published the final report of its third evaluation, and the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission published its first annual evaluation report as the national rapporteur. And then finally, we have the irregular migration chapter, and kind of the main highlights of these were the resumption of deportation orders, which we've discussed already, the suspension of the European Agreement on the abolition of visas for refugees. So this is a European agreement which basically mutually kind of recognizes, gives refugees who are recognized in that country the ability to travel for 90 days without a visa. And it was suspended because of that increased movement of beneficiaries from other countries applying for protection in Ireland, and it was suspended initially for 12 months. I believe it's now been extended, that suspension has been extended for another 12 months. And of course, the major development in this was the regularization scheme for long-term undocumented migrants, which opened in 2022. This once in a generation scheme to give a regular status to those who have been here for a long time. And it saw a campaign as well as the first decisions in 2022.